Everyone in the neighborhood got the invitation on the same day. It showed up in plain white envelopes, with real stamps, handwritten names, no return address. Inside was thick, expensive cardstock with elegant lettering.
Together with their families, Daniel and Claire request the honor of your presence at their wedding.
The date was that Saturday. The location was listed as St. Bartholomew's Church, the old stone church that had been abandoned at the edge of town for years. At first, people assumed it was some kind of mistake. No one on the street knew a Daniel or a Claire. A few neighbors texted each other pictures of the invitation,
Joking about it, some thought it was a prank. Others figured maybe it was meant for another neighborhood.
with the same street name. But what made it unsettling was that every envelope had the correct full name of each resident, even middle initials, even the elderly widow at the corner who barely spoke to anyone. By Friday night, curiosity had replaced confusion. Around 7 the next evening, 5 neighbors decided to drive out. There together. They didn't plan on staying long, just enough to see what kind of joke this was. The church sat off a narrow dirt road, surrounded by trees. Its windows were dark, but as they pulled into the gravel lot, they noticed something strange. There were candles glowing inside. The front doors were slightly open. They hesitated before going in, but the place didn't look vandalized. In fact, it looked prepared. Inside, rows of chairs were neatly arranged, white fabric draped along the pews. A faint smell of fresh flowers hung in the air. At the front of the room stood a small arch decorated with roses and string lights, and on a table near the entrance was a guest book. One of the neighbors laughed nervously and walked over to it. The book was already open. Several names were written inside, names from their street, and the handwriting looked disturbingly accurate. One of the women flipped back a few pages, her face draining of color. Her own name was there, signed, dated earlier that evening. She hadn't been there before. That's when they heard movement behind the altar.
A man stepped out slowly, mid-30s, clean suit, pale, calm. "Thank you for coming," he said. No one responded.
He smiled faintly and glanced toward the front doors. "She's nervous," he added, "but she'll come out soon." Someone finally asked who he was. He looked confused for a moment, then hurt. "I'm Daniel," he said quietly. "You all RSVP'd." The group began backing toward the exit. One of the men said this wasn't funny and that they were leaving.
Daniel's expression shifted. "Please don't," he said. "It took me a long time to find her again."
The room felt colder. He gestured toward the front row. On one of the chairs was a framed photograph of a woman in a wedding dress. The photo looked old, slightly faded. "She died 6 years ago," Daniel said softly. "Car accident, right before the ceremony." He looked at each of them carefully. "But she came back. She lives on your street now." Silence filled the church. "That's why I invited all of you," he continued. "So she'd feel safe." One of the women whispered that he was insane. Daniel shook his head slowly. "I've been watching her for months," he said, "studying her, making sure it's really her." His eyes settled on one of the neighbors, a young woman who had only moved in 3 months earlier. Her breathing became uneven. "I knew it," he said, smiling again. "You came." That's when they ran. They didn't wait to see what he'd do next. They bolted through the doors and into the parking lot. One of them called the police before they even reached their cars. When officers arrived 15 minutes later, the church was empty. No candles, no flowers, no decorations, no guest book, just dust and broken pews. But near the altar, they found something, a single white envelope. Inside was a new invitation. This one had only one name written on it, the young woman's, and at the bottom, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Next time, we won't need guests."